Are capitalism and sustainability incompatible? Since the Industrial Revolution, the world's businesses and economies have largely relied on a model of increasing consumption to attract and reward investment, which can then be used to develop new products and technologies to sustain economic growth. On the issue of climate change, the correlation between economic growth and increasing carbon emissions is striking. The more we grow, the more we pollute. But in order to develop technologies to reduce our impact on the planet, we need companies and governments to invest. And to invest, they need to grow.
You make the big difference is technological change. It's going to cost, and if you don't have growth and enough resources and money to be able to put it into looking at ways in which to get whatever it is that we do to be done more efficiently and in a green way, you just won't achieve that.
But is the way we measure success trapping us in a cycle of consumption and pollution? When we talk about countries being developed or successful, we are often talking about their wealth as measured by gross domestic product.
At the moment, economic growth is usually measured by gross domestic product. That's a measure of economic output. It's an important measure of economic output, but it cannot possibly capture all of the things that are important to the improvement in the quality of people's lives around the world.
So what's the problem with GDP? It measures economic output in terms of goods and services produced and consumed, but it misses other aspects such as whether that actually has a positive impact on people's lives or whether the process of making, marketing and using has a negative effect on the environment.
I think GDP is useful, it measures activity, but we need to stick some other things alongside it. The first thing we need to do is to measure carbon consumption emissions. So that is the carbon emissions that are associated with the things that we buy. Let me give an example. If you buy a building that's made from cross-laminated timber instead of steel and concrete, you can cut the whole life carbon emissions of that building by 80%. GDP doesn't see the difference in that because the buildings actually cost the same. But obviously the climate does see that difference.
But changing the way we think about wealth could well be painful for consumers who have not been used to considering environmental factors. A new model of success would impose extra costs or restrictions on their lifestyles. One example is eating meat, particularly beef, as rearing cows is resource heavy and polluting.
So we will need to see, particularly in the rich world, a reduction in the consumption of meat, particularly in rich countries. We're having a growing epidemic of obesity and other eating-related illnesses, and the solution is going to be to move to diets that are less heavily dependent on red meat and richer in fruit and vegetables.
The question is, how can we make this shift, and how can we convince households that it is in their interest to do so? Some argue that aside from a few significant areas such as cutting back on flying and meat consumption, much of the changes will be in how we do things rather than what we do. A report for the UK government estimated that 7% of the changes needed to become carbon neutral are purely as a result of lifestyle changes, 40% are technological, and the rest is a combination of the two, such as cutting back on driving by making public transport as attractive as driving.
And so I guess the big point here is, we do need to change our lifestyles, but that doesn't mean that we can live bad quality and unhappy lives. In fact, that's what happens if we just pay attention to GDP and allow climate breakdown to continue. Instead, we need to look differently at how we can live a good life and measure progress towards that good life via measures alternative to GDP.
So GDP may be part of the problem, but it's also perhaps part of the solution.
Basically what we need, of course, is a holistic approach. The consumer to be asking for it, better, greener environment, understand that it will cost. Maybe taxes need to go up to take account of the externalities of whatever we do on a daily basis. We don't have a carbon tax across the world, which we should probably have. In the absence of that, we need to think of alternatives, and the consumer can have an impact, but it's not going to do it by itself. It's technology that will do it, and it is only a continuing growing world economy that will be able to afford the investment that is needed.